Hi guys. So we're going to go ahead and go over our quiz review. So the first thing that is on there is your unit circle. So exactly what we did at the end of last semester. So if you do not know how to fill in your unit circle yet, make sure you practice. There is a blank unit circle in the folder from the first day of this 9 weeks. So make sure, again, just upload that to your Notability, fill it out, erase it, fill it out again. Just practice, practice, practice. So I'm going to start with the radian values. So I've got 0, pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. All right, I'll do the pi over 6s. So closest to the x-axis are all of your pi over 6s. We've got 1 pi over 6, and then we write all of the ones that don't reduce. So 2 over 6 reduces, 3 over 6 reduces, 4 over 6 reduces, 5 over 6 is the next one. 6 over 6 reduces, 7 over 6 is the next one. 8 would reduce, 9 would reduce, 10 would reduce, so the last one is 11 pi over 6. The middle ones are the pi over 4s. And again, we write the ones that don't reduce. So 1, 3, 5, 7. And then the last ones are the pi over 3s. We write the ones that don't reduce. So 2 pi over 3, 3 over 3 reduces, so 4 pi over 3, 5 pi over 3. And those are your radian values. All right, then we write our coordinates. So again, the easy ones, 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1. All of the pi over 6s, it's a further horizontal than it is vertical, okay? The x is bigger than the y. So whenever we write that, it's root 3 over 2, comma 1/2. Be careful not to flip those. And I'll go back and put our signs on here in a second. I'm just going to go ahead and write those coordinates, though. Okay. The pi over 4s are all root 2 over 2 for both sine and cosine. All right. And then the pi over 3s are the same as the pi over 6s, but they're flipped. So 1/2 root 3 over 2. And those are your values. So now what we do is we write our negatives, okay? So for our negatives, everything in this quadrant has a negative x, because if you were to graph something, if you go back in that direction, you're going in the negative direction. So negative, negative, negative. Everything in this third quadrant has a negative x and a negative y. Because again, if you graph something, you'd go left and down. So that is negative, 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 negative. All the negatives. Then everything over here in this quadrant, the second number, the y coordinate is negative. Because if you were to plot something, it'd be positive and then negative. All right, so let's go ahead and use our circle to answer these questions now. The sine of 11 pi over 6. Sine is y. The y coordinate at 11 pi over 6 is negative 1/2. Cosine of 3 pi over 4, that's x. There's 3 pi over 4. There's your x. Negative root 2 over 2. Tangent, y divided by x. So the tangent of pi over 2 is going to be 1 divided by 0. You cannot divide by 0, so that is undefined. Cosecant of 2 pi over 3. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so we flip the y coordinate. So 2 pi over 3, flip the y. So 2 over root 3, then we rationalize, and you get your answer. Secant of 5 pi over 4. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so we flip the x. 5 pi over 4, so flip your x. 2 over root 2, and it was negative, so it stays negative. So rationalize, multiply by root 2 top and bottom. Those 2's will cancel out. So you end up with negative root 2. Then the last one, tangent of 7 pi over 6. So 7 pi over 6 is over here. Tangent is y divided by x. So negative 1/2 divided by negative root 3 over 2. So we're going to flip the second and multiply. Those 2's will cancel out. A negative times a negative is a positive. So then we rationalize. And we get root 3 over 3. All right, so after we reviewed our trig values, we learned our new parent functions. So again, just know which graph is which. The waves are sine and cosine. If it has a point at 0, 1, if it starts at the top, that's cosine. If it goes through 0, 0, if it starts in the middle, that's sine. The ones with little squiggly lines are tangent and cotangent. If it goes kind of in that positive looking direction, that's tan. If it goes in the opposite direction, that's cotan. You'll also notice tangent goes through 0, 0. Cotangent has an asymptote. That's another difference. Secant and cosecant are the U's. Now remember, secant's the reciprocal of cosine. Cosine goes through 0, 1, so secant goes through 0, 1. So cosecant is the one that has the asymptote there. All right, just some information about your parent functions. Domain of negative infinity to infinity. These are the ones that don't have asymptotes. Sine and cosine. So the parent functions that have asymptotes are all of the others. Tan, cotan, secant, and cosecant. The parent functions that don't have zeros, if you look back at your graphs, your parabolas do not have any zeros. So that would be secant and cosecant. And then the range of negative infinity to infinity, that is tangent and cotangent. All right, so the last thing, the bulk of this is going to be the stuff we just did most recently. So identifying all of these characteristics. So amplitude is the number that's out in front. So in this case, my amplitude is 1. The phase shift is what you add or subtract to your x. So on this first one, we are not adding or subtracting anything. The period is 2 pi divided by b. So in this case, my b value is pi over 2. So 2 pi divided by pi over 2. We flip the second and multiply. So times 2 over pi gives me 4. So the period is 4. Vertical shift is the minus 5. All right, the next one, amplitude, number out in front. Phase shift, what we add or subtract. Okay, again, that opposite sign. So it's x minus 5, next minus pi, so positive pi. We're going to the right pi. Period, 2 pi over 1 divided by 1 over 5. So flip the second and multiply. And I get 10 pi. Vertical shift, what we add or subtract at the end, nothing on this one. Next one, amplitude. Amplitude is 1. Now, if you wrote -1, I wouldn't count that wrong, but that negative, remember, is a reflection. It's not really part of the amplitude. Phase shift, we're on right 3. Period. Okay, the b value is 2 pi, so 2 pi divided by 2 pi is 1. Vertical shift is the plus 10 at the end. All right, and then the last one, notice the last one is not written the correct way. That would make your phase shift wrong if you don't remember to factor out that 2. So I'm going to rewrite this with the 2 factored out. So if I factor out or divide out that 2, I'd have 3 pi left. So my amplitude is 6. My phase shift is 3 pi. The period is 2 pi divided by b, so 2 pi divided by 2, and the vertical shift is 0. It's not listed as a characteristic, but if you want to make a note, 14 and 15 both have reflections. All right, now going the opposite way, taking the information and writing the equation. So amplitude, it says we can do sine or cosine, so I'll just do sine. The b value I need to know, okay? The period is 4 pi, so the b value is 2 pi divided by 4 pi. Remember, the 2 pi is always in the top of the fraction. So that's 1/2. Then we open up another set of parentheses. Phase shift is negative pi over 3, so in my equation it's going to be plus pi over 3. And then the vertical shift is 8, so at the very end, plus 8. So the general format we're using here, it's A sine parentheses B parentheses x minus c, close your parentheses, plus d. That's the general format that we're using. All right, amplitude is 1, so we don't need to write it. If you do, it's okay, but we don't need to. I'll do this one as cosine. Again, it does not matter. The period is pi over 2. So b is 2 pi over 1 divided by pi over 2. So flip the second and multiply, and I get 4. Phase shift of 3, so it's going to be x minus 3 minus 1. All right, amplitude of 10. I'll do sine this time. B value is 2 pi divided by 6 pi, which is 1/3. Open your next parentheses, x minus pi over 4, and we do not have a vertical shift. Last one, reflection over the x-axis. I'll do cosine this time. A period of 2 pi. So b is 2 pi divided by 2 pi, which is just 1. So we don't have to write it. If you do write 1x, that's okay, but again, you don't have to. I'm just going to say x. There also isn't a phase shift. So if you want to say plus 0 or minus 0, you can, but again, you don't have to. It's just x. And then vertical shift minus 20. All right, the last ones are the hardest ones, so that is where we're trying to write the equation from the graph. Now remember, I told you guys on your quiz it'll be a little bit easier because you'll have kind of some options to choose from. But it's good to know how to write the whole thing, because that's going to help us a lot for what we do next week. All right, so let's find all of our features here. We're going to look for A, B, our phase shift, and our vertical shift. So I'm going to start with the vertical shift. The highest point in this graph is 5. The lowest point in this graph is -5. That means the middle of this graph is 0. So my vertical shift is 0. My amplitude is the height from the middle to the top. So that total distance is 5. So my amplitude is 5. And my vertical shift disappeared. Sorry about that. All right, my B value. So find a point on this graph and see how long it takes to repeat. If you can start at 0, that'll make it a little bit easier. So if I go from 0, this graph will have repeated itself or completed a full cycle at 2 pi. So that total distance there is 2 pi. So the period is 2 pi. So the B value is 2 pi divided by 2 pi, which is 1. The phase shift, okay, depends if it's sine or cosine. So up until this point, sine and cosine, everything's the same. If it's sine, the phase shift is a middle point before the graph goes up. So if I want to write this as sine, I could use negative pi over 2 as that phase shift. Or I could use 3 pi over 2. Either one would work. If I want to write this as cosine, I need a high point. So I could use the x-coordinate of 0. Or you could use 2 pi, okay? Again, there's more than one right answer here. So let's write sine first. Amplitude is 5. The B value is 1. So x, I could do x plus pi over 2. Or I could do x minus 3 pi over 2. Either one is correct. For cosine, everything's the same except for the phase shift. Well, for cosine, it doesn't need a phase shift. It's 0. All right, the domain of every single sine and cosine graph is negative infinity to infinity. Range bottom to top, -5 to 5, and it does have brackets on our range. All right, let's do two. There's two more of these. All right, so let's find our features. We're looking for A, B, phase shift, vertical shift. I'll do vertical shift first. Highest point is 1, lowest point is -1. Middle is 0. Amplitude from the middle to the top. That is a height of 1. Okay, B value. It's kind of hard to see if I start at 0. So let's go from this point to this point. I want to know how big that distance is. The easiest way to find it is the later point minus the earlier point. And again, we're looking at the x's here. So 3 pi over 4 minus negative pi over 4, and that will give us that distance. So that is 3 pi over 4 plus 5 pi over 4, which is 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi. So all of that work to figure out that B is 2 pi divided by 2 pi, which is just 1. So all of that work to figure out it's 1. All right, phase shift. Again, this depends if it's sine or cosine. If I do sine, I'm looking for a middle before my graph moves up. So pi over 4 is one possible answer. If I do cosine, I'm looking for a high point. So negative 5 pi over 4 would work, or 3 pi over 4 would work. And then we write our equation. So amplitude is just 1, so I don't have to write it. B value is 1, so I don't have to write it. X minus pi over 4, and there's no vertical shift. Cosine, again, everything's the same except for the phase shift. Well, in this case, the phase shift's the only thing we have to write. So I can do this as x minus 3 pi over 4. Or I could do x plus 5 pi over 4. That is also correct. Domain for every one of these is negative infinity to infinity. Sorry about that, guys. And the range bottom to top, lowest y value is -1, highest y value is 1. All right, last one. Let's find our values. I'll write them over here. A, B, phase shift, vertical shift. All right, highest point is 5, lowest point is -3. So the middle of these is 1. That's the middle of this graph. So that's my vertical shift. Height from the middle to the top. That's a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4. B value, 2 pi divided by the period. So let's find the period. That's a little harder on this one. I did not give you some good markings. Let's use our middle points. All right. So I could go from this point right here, and this graph would repeat itself here. So from 0 to pi, this completes one circle. So the period is pi. So the B value is 2 pi divided by pi, which is 2. And then the phase shift, again, everything is the same for sine and cosine except for the phase shift. So if I want to write this as sine, okay, this could be a sine graph if I find a middle point before my graph moves up. So I could use 0 for sine. Cosine, I'm looking for a high point. So I could use this one. It's not marked, but it's halfway in between. So it's pi over 4. So we're writing it all in the equation. Amplitude, sine, 2, open your parentheses. I just need a regular x, so honestly, if I didn't open those parentheses, it would be okay. And then plus 1. For cosine, everything's the same except for the phase shift. Domain for every sine and cosine. Range, bottom to top. The lowest y value is -3. The highest y value is 5. All right, so that is it for your quiz review. Again, just make sure you're really familiar with your unit circle, your parent functions, and identifying your transformations.